Hello everyone, it's me Matt. This is the Explorer's Box. It's day 23 and this is our last tutorial together. Today I'm going to walk you through making a chain collar. I'm going to take this time at the end of our series of videos to show you basically the main products that we make at the Armchair Armoury, that being our rings and what we can do with them. As I said with the cuffs, any adventurer or explorer or quester out there is going to need some sort of armour or protective gear to keep them safe. One small little piece of armour that we make are collars. We also do standards, which are longer, or they could be confused for aventails, which go on helmets. But I'm going to show you a very simple, fairly quick to make collar that you can construct with not a whole bag of our rings, but half a bag. So you could make two. I'm going to be showing you our 8mm copper and brass square rings today, but we've got a whole plethora on the website that I'm sure you can go and see. So there's plenty to choose from if you want some variety or some different colour in your armour. I'm going to show you how to make the chain today, and we're going to do the leather and all the sewing and all the accoutrements tomorrow. To start, you need to work out the size of your project. We make all of our collars 14 inches in length, or I guess in circumference because it's going around a neck. That's the average neck size in the UK, regardless of gender. There'll be a little bit big for femme presenting and plenty of room for any of those mask guys out there like Andy. But the good thing about chain is because it has room to grow and expand, you can basically make your piece as long or as short as necessary. To start, I am going to take one bag of rings, which I have decanted into some cups. We're going to need 500 roughly for this project, and the majority of them are going to need to be opened. So I'm going to take 2 pairs of trusted pliers. I like to use 2 combination pairs. Some people like to use combination and needle nose. Whatever floats your boat. And I'm going to take all of my rings and I'm just going to open them. I say all of them, I'm actually going to need some closed. The way we start our chain is I knit together the first 3 rows as a whole set, which means the top and the bottom row we need to be closed. So I'm going to close about 100 of my 500 rings and then open the rest. So I've prepped all of my rings, I've opened and closed all of them. As you can see, that's now got a large opening and those ends are butted together. I like to try and prep the majority of my rings before a project. Sometimes you can't because you don't know how many you're using, or you just want to do a little bit and then come back to it later. So this is entirely optional, just preferable to me. The way I start chain is I take 1 open ring and 4 closed rings, and then I close that open ring. I'm then going to take another ring, place it through those first 2 rings, take 2 more closed rings and close it up. I'm then going to repeat this process and make a 3-row chain until I get to my desired length, which in this case is 14 inches. Or 35-ish centimetres? 35.5 in real life measurements.
In centimetres.
So I've completed the first 3 rows to the length I want them to be. What you'll notice is this chain is actually 43 centimetres or 17 inches rather than the desired 14 inches or 35.5 centimetres. That's because you don't want your chain to be fully expanded. You want it to be closer together. This means it's far more flexible. It also means the weave is tighter, so you are protected more. What you want to do is you want to bunch your chainmail close together to where it's sort of naturally sitting, where it's happy to be. And that is the measurement you want to take. Not when it's fully expanded, but when it's sat nicely together, like that. And there you'll see I end up with slightly larger than, but roughly 35.5 centimetres or 14 inches.
Matt, I've got a question.
Yes, Andy.
Is that how you would measure a shirt?
Yes, exactly. The principle is precisely the same. When you are measuring yourself for a shirt, you want to take measurements at your chest and hips and neck and wherever, and you want to add approximately 2 or 3 inches to that, which allows the chain to hang naturally closer together. That also means, because it's in, it's going to expand that way as well, which is what you want, because in this orientation the mail hangs off of you and it contours to your shape. So the start I have done here, you can leave your finger there.
I'm tired now.
The start I have done here is exactly the same for any chainmail project you are making. You want to work out the length you need, you want to knit this sort of 3-row chain together, and then you want to bunch it in till it sits naturally, like I said, and then you find your measurement. So if you're making a shirt and your chest is 42 inches, you're going to want to measure yourself at 44, 45 inches. You're then going to want to make a panel half that because you're making 2. And basically what you'll do is you'll knit to, say, what would that be, 22 inches, 23 inches? You would make your chain to that long and then bring it back.
But when it's bunched.
Yes. You'd make it to that long, then you'd make it longer, and you would bunch it back to get to your needed size.
And that allows it to expand around a person.
That allows it to expand around a person. It allows it to be flexible so that if your body changes shape, then you're not confined in it. You want your chain not to be skin tight. It needs to be not baggy, but it needs to have flex in it. It needs to be large enough that you can wear padded clothing under it as well.
It needs to be big enough for you to move around in, basically.
Exactly.
I love it. Thank you. That was very informative.
That's all right. So now, with that start done, we are going to get onto the meat of the project. With our collars, we usually do about a 50mm upstand. This is the bit that goes around your neck before the expansions start. This is the same for any type of collared mantle or standard, exactly the same as with the collar, so this tutorial will apply to those. They are just added extras. They are the next tier up of difficulty. In our 8mm square rings, that becomes about 8 rows. So I'm now going to knit in 5 more rows to get to our desired size. As before, I'm going to take my ring, I'm going to put it through 2, and that's it. Now that I'm doing 1 row as opposed to 3, you want to put 1 ring into 2. It's much easier, there's so much less slippage. And you build up your row as you go. If you wanted to speed weave your chain, you could in fact do the first stage we've just done again. You could close about 50% of your rings and open the other 50, and you could make lots of sections of that 3-row chain that we did, and then knit those together again with open rings. That is quicker, however, it's very tricky to do fast. You end up weaving it together quite slowly, and it also only really works with thinner or rounder rings. With these square rings, because they're so thick, it's very hard to get your pliers into a ring that's attached to 4 others. This is so much easier, especially if you've opened your rings already. So for me, doing a 1 row chain at a time is perfect, but you certainly can give it a go. There are exceptions. I've done some rubber and alley chain, and that I will always do in 3 rows at a time because it's flexible and those rings are so much more malleable. So that's 2 rows knitted together. I'm now going to do the next off camera just to speed up the process, and I shall get back to you in a moment. Okie dokie. So that is our 8 rows finished. That's going to give us the full height on the upstanding collar. And next we are going to add our expansions. When I added in the extra rows, I have actually taken a column, I suppose you could say, off. So I've now reduced these to 50 rings a row. They were 52, just because I want to make this one slightly shorter than the one I am copying. Now that we've got the rectangle finished and I want to add the expansions in, we need to work out where they're going to go. This is 50 rings wide, which means I can make 8 expansions, or rather I can make 8 dags coming off of it. The reason we put in expansions is because it means it's going to flare out and sit nicer upon your neck. It also means that if you're making a bishop's mantle or a standard, this is exactly the same procedure. This is where your expansions would start, and then you would keep adding more as the rows go down. I'm going to put 8 dags on my collar, which means I need 9 expansions. If you were going to do something larger, like a standard or a mantle, you're going to want at least 12 expansions, if not more. Sometimes I go up to about 14. That just means that the piece eventually will sit in a complete circle, so that it will drape over your shoulders much better. But because this is a short one and only needs to cover your neck, we don't need as many. I am going to flip this over so that the rows for me are now on the top. I'm going to start 1 row in, and we are going to add a single ring attached to that 1 ring. This will become our expansion. What I will then do when I've put all these in is I will then close these 2 rings and these 2 rings with 1, just like usual, and it means that one of our rings, or rather 9 of our rings, will have 3 on, which eventually, if you were to put lots on, would widen the whole pattern out. I'm then going to go 6 rings along, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and add my next expansion. To work out where yours are, you kind of just want to count the number of rings you have, find a number that is divisible, and then that will give you an even number of dags. Then, if we have worked this out correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the last expansion should mirror the first, in that it is the 2nd ring along the row. If you're 1 out, it wouldn't matter so much. Sometimes that does happen because things don't divide completely. As long as it looks good, that's the important thing. But you do want the gap between each of your expansions to be the same, so that your dags are the same length. Then what we're going to do is we're simply going to build up a triangle in between each of these sections. This is actually a very nice way to build chainmail in general. It makes you kind of see your progress a lot better than the way I've done it, which is just row, 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 row. You can't really tell how much you've added because it's just a block, whereas if you're adding triangles in, you can do a whole row of triangles and then do something else and come back. So now, on this row with the expansions, I need to add in the rest of the rings. So I'm going to close up those first 2. I'm going to hold that expansion and then going to close up the next 2, and what you'll see is that 2nd ring now has 5 attaching to it.
It's a 5-in-1 rather than a 4-in-1.
Yes. And then we are simply going to go and continue along this row. That's the last row done. Now, I mentioned dags, then I did another row. Let's actually show you a dag. I'm going to start in the middle just for convenience sake. We're going to use our expansions as the guidelines for our triangles. So I'm not going to attach anything to that just yet. I'm going to take the 2 rings next to the expansion and attach 1 ring to those. And then I'm going to follow along until we get to that, or until we get to the 2 rings just before the expansion. So I'm putting in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rings on top of the 6 that are in between those 2 extra rings. And that is our first triangle done. You'll notice it's a little bit shorter than these ones. Don't get ahead of yourself. I'm going to come back to them in a moment. I'm going to finish off the rest of the dags like this one, and then we're going to have a colour change. Righty ho, so that is the initial phase of dags completed. Now we are going to do something interesting. Now I may have slightly underestimated the amount of rings we're going to need because I forgot about our trim colour. I've opened about 100 brass rings and I'm going to do a line all the way along to give it a nice little finishing detail, and then we're going to finish up with the last of the copper rings, which I might need to open slightly more of, and do a final line above the brass. This is why I have missed out the expansion, because we're going to add the brass rings and that will become the layer they are on. So without further ado, I'm going to add a brass ring to one side of that expansion, and then we basically just build up the triangle on one side. So we're going to do a line there, and then we're going to build up from the other side and go like that. First dag done, now to do the rest. And there we go, that is one brass line all the way around our copper. Now that could very much be the end of it, you know, we could finish there if you wanted. I am going to add one last line in of copper. The one that I'm following along and other previous ones I've done usually have 2 rows of an edging colour, so you could do another row of brass if you wanted. You could even do one along the top if you wanted to be extra fancy. And without further ado, I've got some extra rings hot off the press from Andy, and I'm going to finish up. And then, my friends, we have it. That is our chainmail all completed. I ended up using about 600 rings in the end, so slightly more than I calculated, but still well within one bag's worth of rings. Tomorrow I'm going to do the leather and the buckles and all of the sewing and everything, and we will get this finished. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you again tomorrow. I've been Matt. This has been the Explorer's Box. See you later. Bye.